Welcome to Logikos. We're a community of people living life together, grappling with philosophy, current events, and the Christian Bible. You know, if the claims of Jesus are true, it means a lot for our lives. And if the claims of Jesus are not true, it means a lot for our lives. So I think it's extremely important for us to just have a community of people who are a mix of, Bible believing Christians, are people who are seeking, who are just interested to see if there's any value in this Christian life for them. People who have friends who might be Christian and they're just trying to understand what they believe, or people who oppose the Christian worldview and you're looking for a reason. You might have been someone who prayed, one of those prayers of like, God, if you are real, show yourself to me. And maybe you are currently in that pursuit right now. So no matter where you're at in your walk and your beliefs, you're welcome here. This is a community that's not going to beat you up, but will instead just be built on respect and sincere interest in logic, right? And this word logikos, what that means is to be perfect in maturity or perfect in knowledge, right? So Jesus has a section where he says, be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So that word there is logikos. And the concept there is that we are to know God and then to revere God and then to reflect his nature to other people here on this earth. So that's what the Logikos is all about. And as a community, that's really what we're focused on. We're focused on just showing people love and dignity and being intellectually honest and actually doing the legwork of research and prayer and working together as a community. So I'm so sorry I didn't introduce myself. I am Brandon Edwards, and we're probably going to have some other people here on the channel, but for now, it's just me and you hanging out. So I have a background studying at Ozark Christian College in Joplin, Missouri, and also with Reformed Theological Seminary and Westminster Theological Seminary. So I have quite a bit of background and have helped with several church plants, and I just really love the church. I've met so many people who are lifelong friends who've been there through thick and thin, and I hope everyone else experiences that same tightness of community. So first thing we're going to get into, now that the housekeeping's done, we're going to get into a harmony of the Gospels. And so what's a harmony? Let's answer that. So if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those are books of the Bible that were written giving an account of Jesus's life. So either eyewitnesses or interviewing eyewitnesses, and that's the content in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So as Western minds, we tend to think chronologically, right? Like we watch a movie and we expect it to be like in the beginning, and then, content happens, and then in the end it resolves. Well, an Eastern mind doesn't think in terms of chronology. They think more in terms of relationships and qualities, okay? Think of a painting, right? A painting, like a big mural, what happens first and what happens last on a mural? I mean, it's not in chronological order. So the purpose of a painting is to show the relationships between the different objects or concepts. It's not meant to show, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, right? And you can certainly demonstrate those things in a painting, but that's not the purpose of a painting. A painting is meant to just really show emotion and quality and relationships. And so that's how Matthew, Mark, and John, for the most part, are written. Luke is actually an interesting one because Luke is a Gentile. He's not a Jew. And so he does think with a pretty Western mind, and he's also a physician. He's well studied. He's going around, and he was basically commissioned by Theophilus, and we'll read that section here in a second, to go and interview people and to form a collection of eyewitness accounts and form a narrative around like what's going on. Like people are talking about this Jesus guy. Like is he a threat to the Roman government? Like what should we know about him, right? And so that's what Luke gets into. So the harmony of the Gospels is useful for that purpose. It will work through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John together as best as scholarship can determine in chronological order. Okay, and it's useful because John might say a detail because of his background that we'll really start to pick up on who John is and how he's different than the other gospel writers, or we'll pick up on like the deep attention to detail that Luke puts into things because he's a physician. He's used to, noting like medical, details that are very, very important for diagnosis as a, disease progresses or an injury progresses, right? So, let's get into it. Our very first text, this is section 1, is Luke 1, verse 1 through 4. So it's this whole pericope right here. And we are currently on BibleHub.com, reading the English Standard Version, or ESV. BibleHub.com is free, by the way. We're going to use it a lot on this channel. So hopefully this is really useful to you. You'll see a lot of this, and there's commentaries built into that. And I'll teach you how to think, through these issues like someone would think if they went through, Bible college or are into scholarship. So hopefully you can get some really useful tools here. So let's start. Luke 1, verse 1. So inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us. It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things you have been taught. So, why is Luke starting off with a dedication? So this Theophilus guy, it's my position that he's basically a patron. He's paying for this research to be done. He's probably a magistrate. The language that's used is whole most excellent Theophilus. That really kind of scratches at the fact that he's probably pretty high in society. Like he's a man of class and position, right? And this section here, that you may have certainty concerning the things you've been taught. I think right here he's specifically referencing the other Gospels. He's referencing that Matthew, Mark, and John were already written, or sections of them were written, and that he understands it, but he's not sure how this kind of progresses chronologically. And I think that's what Luke is intentionally trying to do, where we see an orderly account, right? It seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time. So he's been paying attention to what these Christians are doing. They're doing some weird stuff, right? To write an orderly account for you. So Luke's entire goal here is just to get all the facts on the table, as many as possible, all the facts, to equip Theophilus, who's probably paid for this research to be done, to understand just who are these Christians, what do they believe, what do they want of society, are they dangerous, should we cut them a break even if what they're doing is weird, is there any legitimacy to the claims they're making that this Jesus figure rose from the dead? That's a big, bold claim, and if he is the Messiah of the Jews that they're talking about, then should the Roman government be concerned about him overthrowing the Roman government, So that's like the context that we're finding ourselves in here. So I also wanted to show you how to kind of use Bible Hub. So let's say we just read that and we want to know where to go next because we want to get some scholars like understandings and their comments on there. If you were to just click on comment right here, because we're on Luke 1:1, it will just take us there, right? And all of these are scholars who have written what's called a commentary. And a commentary is a scholar's comments on specific biblical texts. They give you like some historical background, comparing and contrasting different texts to one another. Pretty useful stuff. Personally, I'm a really big fan of Barnes and Calvin and Benson. So I think everyone will find favorites of theirs, but I really do find that Barnes, he's a Presbyterian, dude who wrote really, really solid pastoral notes. So that's what, if you were to click on that, it'll take you here. And so this is all of Luke 1 and the notes therein from Barnes. Okay. So, preface to Luke. Little is certainly known concerning the time and place of writing this gospel or concerning the author. The first time we have any mention of the author is in his own history in Acts 16:10 through 11. He was then the companion of Paul in his travels, and it is evident that he often attended Paul in his journeys. So if you read Acts 16:11 through 17 and Acts 21:1 through 6, you'll see that. And all of these are hyperlinks too. Like if we were to click on that, it would take us to the text here. So, we can see keep in mind Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke. He also wrote Acts. So Acts is kind of like Luke part 2, But yeah, he's saying we put out to sea and sailed straight. So the we being Paul and Luke, right? So anyways, we were getting into it and I clicked on something and now we're back. There you go. So from this circumstance, the ancients regarded this gospel as, in fact, the gospel which Paul had preached. They affirmed that Luke recorded what the apostle preached. Thus, Irenaeus says, Luke, the companion of Paul, put down in a book the gospel preached by him. He also says Luke was not only a companion, but also a fellow laborer of the apostles, especially of Paul. Origen, speaking of the Gospels, says the third is, according to Luke, the gospel commended by Paul, published for the sake of the Gentile converts. The testimony of the fathers is uniform that it was written by Luke, the companion of Paul, and was therefore regarded by them as really the gospel which Paul preached. So hear this right here. Paul and Luke hung out. Paul, being very, very, very Jewish, right? He was like very high society amongst the Jews, and he was also a lawyer. He's working with Luke, who's a Gentile, but he's a physician. So you have two extremely educated people who are from completely opposed worldviews, the Gentile worldview and the Jewish worldview. And they're laboring together, to bring the gospel forth. So you have to hear this, that like Luke and Acts are really going to appeal to a Western mind. We're going to read what he's saying and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because he's writing with us in mind, which is super cool. It is not known where it was written. Jerome says it was composed in, how do you pronounce that? Achaia? Let's see. Achaia, okay. It was a province of the Roman Empire. So that's cool. There seems to be some probability that it was written to persons that were well acquainted with Jewish manners, as the author does not stop to explain the peculiar customs of the Jews, as some of the other evangelists have done. Respecting the time when it was written, nothing very definite is known. All that can with certainty be ascertained is that it was written before the death of Paul in 65 AD. For it was written before Acts 1:1, and that the book only brings down the life of Paul to his imprisonment at Rome and previous to his going to Spain. So this is something I want to note. So Paul, he kept thinking that like he had to go to Spain. He had to go to Spain because as soon as he was going to go to Spain, the assignment that God gave him will be fulfilled, and he'll be able to finally leave this mortal coil and go into heaven and be with Christ, right? He even complains so much. He's like, I desire to leave this life and to go be with Christ, which is far greater. But for your benefit, I'll stay here, right? Like, he's kind of salty when he says it. But I think he really has like just this tired heart. He's exhausted. He's laboring hard, but it's because he loves the Gentiles. He loves people so much and just wants them to know Christ, and he's going to just work himself literally till he dies. And that's what happened. So it has been made a matter of inquiry whether Luke was a Gentile or a Jew. I think he's a Gentile. On this subject, there is no positive testimony. Jerome and others of the fathers say that he was a Syrian and he was born at Antioch. The most probable opinion seems to be that he was a proselyte to the Jewish religion. Jewish. I said Jewess, and that's not a word. Though descended from Gentile parents. For this opinion, two reasons may be assigned for some weight. First, he was intimately acquainted, as appears by the Gospel and the Acts, which the Jewish rites, customs, opinions, and prejudices, and he wrote in their dialect, that is, with much of the Hebrew phraseology in a style manner similar to other evangelists, from which it appears that he was accustomed to the Jewish religion and was therefore probably a proselyte. So for those who don't know, a proselyte is someone who is a Gentile, meaning not of Hebrew blood, who comes to the Hebrew faith and reveres Yahweh, the Jewish God. So basically a Gentile converting to Judaism, right? Yet the preface to his gospel, as critics have remarked, is pure classic Greek, unlike the Greek that was used by native Jews, from which it seemed not improbable that he was by birth and education a Gentile. Right? And that this is the position I hold. I think that this dude was so well educated in Gentile matters that it'd be surprising that he's a blood Jew, right? In Acts 21:27, it is said that the ascetic Jews excited the multitude against Paul because he had introduced Gentiles into the temple, thus defiling it. Hint, hint, Gentiles like Luke, cough, cough. So in Acts 21:28, it is said that the Gentile to whom they had referenced was Trophimus, that's correct, and Ephesian. Yet Luke was also at the time with Paul. If he had been regarded as a Gentile, it's probable that they would have made complaint respecting him, as well as Trophimus, from which it is supposed that he was a Jewish proselyte. But again, in the epistles to the Colossians 4:9 through 11, we find Paul saying that Aristarchus, I think that's right, Aristarchus, and Marcus and Barnabas and Justus saluted them, who are, he adds, of the circumcision, that is, Jews by birth. In Colossians 4:14, he says that Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas also saluted them, from which it is inferred that they were not of the circumcision, but were by birth Gentiles. Most writers suppose that Luke, the writer of this gospel, was intended in the above place in Colossians. If so, his profession was that of a physician. And it has been remarked that his descriptions of diseases are more accurate and circumstantial and have more technical correctness than those of other evangelists. Luke does not profess to have been an eyewitness of what he recorded. See Luke 1:2 through 3, right? So if you look at 1:2 through 3, you can see he literally says he talked to eyewitnesses, right? He's like, I talked to them. It is clear, therefore, that he was not one of the 70 disciples, nor one of the two who went from Emmaus, as has been sometimes supposed, nor was he an apostle by the Father he is uniformly called the companion of the apostles, and especially of Paul. If he was not one of the apostles, and if he was not one of those expressly commissioned by our Lord to whom the promise of infallible teaching of the Holy Ghost was given, the question arises by what authority his gospel and the Acts have a place in the sacred canon, or what evidence is there that he was divinely inspired? Those are super good questions, right? Like, how do we know this is legitimate and we should treat this, as authoritative? In regard to this question, the following considerations may give satisfaction. So 1, they were received by all the churches on the same footing as the first 3 Gospels. There is not a dissenting voice in regard to their authenticity and authority. The value of this argument is this, that if they had been spurious or without authority, the fathers were the proper persons to know it, meaning the early church fathers. They would have called this out, and they upheld that as legitimate, right? They were published during the lives of the apostles, Peter, Paul, and John, and were received during their lives as books of sacred authority. If the writings of Luke were not inspired and had no authority, those apostles could easily have destroyed their credit, and we have reason to think it would have been done. They were pretty quick to call out false gospels, and so they did not hesitate. This was their life's work, blood, sweat, and tears. They're not playing games here, right? They would have called it out, and instead they basically stamped it. 3, it is the united testimony of the fathers that this gospel was submitted to Paul and received his express approbation. It was regarded as the substance of his preaching, and if it received his... I'm going to sneeze. I'm okay. I'm telling you, I do this live. I'm doing it live, guys. We're doing it live. It was regarded as the substance of his preaching, and if it received his approbation, it comes to us on the authority of his name. Indeed, if this be the case, it rests on the same authority as the epistles of Paul himself, right? So Paul basically stamped it with his approval, and so did the early church fathers like Origen. 4, it bears the same marks of inspiration as the other books. It is simple, pure, yet sublime. There's nothing unworthy of God, and it is elevated far above the writings of any uninspired man. And 5, if he was not inspired, if, as we suppose, he was a Gentile by birth, and if, as is most clear, he was not an eyewitness of what he records, it is inconceivable that he did not contradict the other evangelists. That he did not borrow from them is clear, nor is it possible to conceive that he could write a book varying in the order of its arrangement so much, and adding so many new facts and repeating so many recorded also by the others, without often having contradicted what was written by them. Let any man compare the Gospels with spurious Gospels of the following centuries, and he'll be struck with the force of this remark. So what he's basically pointing out here is there were a ton of people who were writing all these like false Gospels, and they did not get their facts right. They were all over the place. They tripped over their own feet because there's just it's like if you're going to tell a lie, you better keep your lie simple. But this is really, really, really complex, and so it's improbable that someone who was not telling the truth got so many facts absolutely crystal clear and in agreement with a lot of other heavyweights at the time, right? So this actually is a super good apologetic in my view. Just the probability of contradictions, and it doesn't have them. 6, if it be objected that not being an apostle, he did not come within the promise of inspiration made to the apostles, it may be replied that this was also the case with Paul. Yet no small part of the New Testament is composed of his writings, meaning Paul wrote most of the New Testament, right? And if Luke was with Paul and Paul put a stamp on it, it's probably good stuff. The evidence of the inspiration of the writings of Luke and Paul is to be judged not only by that promise, but by the early reception of the churches, by the testimony of the fathers as to the judgment of inspired men when living, and by the internal character of the works. Luke has all these equally with the other evangelists. So why should you believe that Luke is a legitimate gospel? I think these are pretty solid arguments, right? The early church fathers received them. They didn't shoot them down. They would have if they were full of, things that were heretical or just blatantly incorrect. It was published during the same time as Peter, Paul, and John. These are really good arguments. So that is what Barnes has to say on the matter, and there's a few notes from Dr. Mark Moore, and I'll read this too. I also strongly recommend, I'll put a link in the description, but do pick this book up. Okay, this is The Chronological Life of Christ by Mark E. Moore, and this was Mark's work doing this huge Harmony of the Gospels, and I'll probably see if I can get Mark on for some of these episodes, because he literally wrote the book on it, so he's a qualified person to have, and he's also just a pleasant person to be around. But I strongly recommend you pick this book up for your own studies. We'll be capturing some sections from Mark's work here, but I'm not going to just read it long form. And then I do want you to also know that this right here is the Harmony of the Gospels. Robert L. Thomas and Stanley N. Gundry. I'll throw that link in the description as well. But this is the companion to this physical book. I am in this series just doing this on the computer, so you don't have to buy these books, but I really do recommend for your long-term, lifelong Bible studies, you do pick these books up, because you'll answer a ton of questions, and it'll be really helpful. And let's see here. So Mark has this section saying, there was oral testimony of eyewitnesses. This should not be taken lightly. Luke stresses that their witnesses go clear back to the beginning of the story. They are well-informed and highly credible. Any theory of the gospel origins that does not take into account all three sources that Luke lists is destined to be seriously flawed. Furthermore, Luke's veracity can be verified by the fact that he admits up front that he himself was not an eyewitness. This is not the work of a fanciful storyteller, but an honest and reliable researcher. Like, this logical context here, for me, reinforces my faith. It gives me confidence that, like, why would they tell you, if they were trying to blow smoke, why would they tell you things that aren't, like, embellishing and over flattering? Why would they tell you details that are like, yeah, I wasn't an eyewitness, but I still wrote this book? Like, they wrote that because it's legitimate, right? Like, that's what happened. Luke uses a fascinating word for investigate. Etymologically, it means to follow alongside. It pictures the pesky reporter with his notepad and pen, incessantly asking questions. Luke did careful and detailed research, which he describes here with 4 words. 1, everything. Luke is the longest and most complete of the 4 Gospels, and combined with Acts makes up 27% of the New Testament. We read more from the pen of Luke than we do from Peter or John or even Paul. From Luke, we get a full understanding of the beginnings of the Christian church. And then 2, from the beginning, Luke is the only gospel writer who gives us a fully detailed account of the birth of Jesus and John the Baptist, right? He gives us details on that in this next section too. 3, he's carefully, so better accurately. His investigation was careful, precise, and accurate. There have been many who criticize Luke as a historian, but never with great success or the support of archaeology. And so, yeah, Luke is really a special source that we have in the Gospels here, and then 4, orderly account. It was not just that Luke's account was orderly, but it was in order. And we're Western minds, so we really like to hear that, right? This word seems to indicate a chronological procession. And we see some examples if you want to do further reading. Luke 8:1, Acts 3:24, Acts 11:4, and Acts 18:23. This is not to say that Luke never deviates from a strict chronology for a thematic arrangement or theological purpose, but he is the only gospel writer to claim to be chronological in his arrangement. We ought to keep this in mind when harmonizing these 4 gospels, right? So he has some more details there too, and if you pick up the book, you can just keep reading it here. But this name Theophilus, this is super interesting. It means friend of God. And so this is dedicated to friend of God. Some believe him to be a fictitious representation of all those who love God, yet this specific title of honor, most excellent, argues against that. It seems likely that he was an associate or an acquaintance whom Luke wants to convert or strengthen in his faith. It is also possible that he's a Roman official whom Luke would like to convince that Christianity is a legal religion, perhaps even Paul's defense attorney in Rome. And I think that holds quite a bit of weight, actually, which you can reference Acts 28 for that. Another strong possibility is that Theophilus is the patron or publisher of the book. It was, after all, not uncommon for a writer to dedicate his book to the fellow footing the bill. This much is certain, however, Luke did not produce these 2 volumes for Theophilus alone. While it's addressed to the individual, it is meant for the broader Christian community. So, interesting, right? We literally just went over this small little section here, and all of that, substance is actually under the hood on this. And so, regardless of whether you're a Bible-believing Christian or someone who's agnostic and you're just trying to see what you believe, or whether you're an atheist who is just trying to understand, what Christians believe so you can interact with them. I do want you to know that Christians describe the Bible as being the Word alive. They describe it as living and active, and it has things in it that will speak to you in a way that are punctual and meaningful and timely. And I really hope that you experience that. I really hope and pray that God will engage you mentally, in your heart, in your strength of person, strength of character, that he will give you a substance of faith to believe, and that you will become an even deeper, enriched person than you already are. So that is my hope and prayer for you. Thank you for joining us here on episode 1 of Logikos, Harmony of the Gospels. Until next time, I am Brandon Edwards, and lay to love you. Bye.